I just thought.
You mentioned that list of Tim's games, especially the ones that are drawn to technology that count up touch.
Thoughts in, thoughts out.
Let me.
I would say the Liza Claw and Test Guy here. But it's super, I told him that's yes.
When you get super fast.
Well, especially when you just get that jerk before it.
Try it sometimes. Fun to try it out. It feels like a nice car to drive. I like how luxury drive.
Well, especially when it still has the ability to get out of the move when you need it to. I'll fix one way back and sleep. You got a CD player, so on future search. Yeah, mine's probably like the year before they dropped them, but 17. But I've got an intro out. I'll try to see player in case I want it. So how's the desktop?
Right, don't break it.
Steve's throwing everything he can at it to see if he can bog it down so far.
Channeling it over.
So now they're just putting in mods in it just to see if we can handle it.
You need to render some like real 4K footage and see how easily you can, especially the timeline scroll. See if you can like scroll through.
Since Adobe only lets us have it on 2 PCs at any time, I have to disable it from Sarah's, enable it on mine. And when she needs it, she has to disable it.
Which kind of use this?
If it's ever available.
Oh, yeah, to keep track of what you do, yeah. Because they can't remember all the time. I guess, it's one of those I'll forget, so what do I drink all at once? Well, that's not like how it works. Because that's what I think. I think for a lot of things, if I have to do something within a day, it's pretty enough, I just get it over with.
No, it don't work that way. You have to drink so much water an hour.
You know, they say coffee has a fruity aftertaste.
Yeah, we don't drink 2%, which you have to be to expect it.
Good for cereal.
I figured it. Somebody had church on it once.
I'm hoping maybe we can leave till Sunday because I know that it's
Yeah.
down there.
We Oh, Sarah, where's the other bag? It's got the. Uh-oh. I'll have to have the flashing lights again. There's just no other way to do it. I mean, I could put it in here, I guess, but... Well, not if I don't put it all the way down. Because I can... Well, I like to keep, so we got both options. And if we really, really start to think this is the better audio... Well, one's stereo, this is mono. Hey.
Yeah, she's not getting any better.
But they don't have a prognosis on her?
The liver's going out.
So she's having organ failure?
Kidney failure, liver failure, retaining water. I don't know if the infection's gone or not, but you can have an infection and live, but you can't live without a liver.
You can't. But liver, if it was just the liver, they can have living donors because the liver can take part of yours and give it to someone and yours will grow back. It's the only organ that'll do that I know of. Other than skin, if you consider that important. But because one of the things too, when the liver filters the blood, and if it doesn't filter, there's all kinds of things that get into it and can make it so you can't think straight or...
She can't think straight right now. She can't recognize my stepdad. She only says, "I love you."
But you did get a good conversation with her a week or so ago?
I was able to explain enough of the gospel. Which was my whole goal at that time. Of course, I was crying the whole time.
Yeah. But that can add emphasis to it, actually, Mike. Because it shows the caring that's there. It is such a difficult thing to see, but you want to have hope for someone that you love, even especially those we love naturally. 62, that's not very old.
You're talking about dialysis next.
And that would filter the blood, which might be good.
But
Yeah.
it doesn't.
If they're choosing to do that, they must still have some hope for her. Because I don't know they put her through these
That'll help
processes.
the kidney. I don't know if that'll help the liver much. The liver's supposed to help try and give some kind of energy to her.
Maybe
She just
one's
doesn't
playing
have
off
it.
the other. I don't know.
I don't know either. And respirator was also mentioned.
But she's not on a respirator yet.
No, she's got a bunch of stuff on her nose.
Okay, just for oxygen level. And
Yeah, oxygen levels we'll talk about a lot.
what's your mom's first name?
Sarah.
Sarah, okay. This is definitely one of the few things in life that is so serious we can't avoid it. We have to think about our own mortality, and those around us.
I was down there watching her, I'm just going, this is what life has to offer for everyone.
Sin, yep. This is what sin ends up with, no matter what it promises. And we'll keep praying for her.
Guess how old
You know,
Maybe.
his stepdad's even put on Facebook, he's asking for prayers. He's not religious at all.
Yep.
Yes, all right.
But at this point, trying to talk to anyone else, that's too hard for me right now. So that's something I'm very important.
Understandably, though, most people, if you care enough about somebody, it's just hard to keep your composure. I know talking about my mom, still get choked up thinking about it and talking about it, so.
I don't know how you can do it of talking about her while preaching and not lose composure.
Well, I think what got me through the service down there, other than the first, was the seriousness of what she would want most of all pushed. What she clung to, slipping into eternity, and that's what made me think I have to get past it. But then, like I mentioned, then you think about the glory of everything you're talking about. Oh, right.
Yeah,
Did you get that?
It was in the thing.
Oh, and you got a screenshot?
I took a screenshot of it. And I sent it to him. How'd you get that? He says he was part of the Illuminati, but
Yeah, that was taken right here.
oh, really?
That picture, yeah. It was early times when we were all coming here, my mom and brother and sister and brothers and sister. Then they moved back to Ohio, so.
Yeah, I haven't seen your. I'm guessing that's your youngest brother.
I'm hoping I can get him to stay a Sunday sometime, but he's very active in his church down there, so.
Okay. What's his name?
David. Yeah.
Yeah. Was he at the thing in Ohio that I went to?
Yeah, he did song leading. That's my little brother.
When I went down there from MacArthur.
Oh. Yeah, he was there.
Okay.
Yep, he and Catherine.
Okay.
Well, we better start. John and Carol are on. And others, okay. Okay, it's about time to start. Not many here tonight, so you can spread out. So those online don't know how many we've got, so we can look like we've got a lot. Right. Yeah, we need to put a wig on Starling so it looks like another person. I think, who is that? Do have a couple pages back there, 11 and 12. We're on 10. Don't know if we'll make it past 10, but we might. It was toward the fall of 2013 that we had started this study, just so you know, it's been a long time. Lest anybody thinks, boy, he sure repeats things awfully fast. Think how young some of us were back then. Oh, look, Isaac did bring food. Thank you. Oh, nice. Yes.
Yeah, no, not this one.
Yeah, the first time through was 2013. So, 9 years ago? Yes. I was in my early 40s. Early 40s.
I just moved back from Texas at that time,
Yeah.
after my late husband passed.
I was what, 45, 46? Yeah, so yeah, back when we were younger and other things obviously happening. Well, this is what we were talking about here at the time, in case anybody's curious. And if you don't remember it, well, it's a good thing we're going through it again. So, Becky and I were talking about it earlier today, and she said it's kind of like going through it the first time because there's just so many things you miss, and that's good. Let's hope everyone has that viewpoint. All right, let me get this started. Okay. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I am often hesitant to say there are certain texts where I get particularly excited about, but I've already leaked that, I think. This is one of my all-time favorite texts to speak on and to speak about. I love going through this text. I know I've stated these things so many times, people probably getting tired of it, but maybe you don't have a good memory, so you think I'm saying it for the first time, who knows. But again, I used to say these were my life verses with a good bit of seriousness in them. It's very easy. I don't think, again, anyone here does not know what this is like, but it's very easy to get to a situation in life, oftentimes, quite often through life, where we feel insignificant. Did you ever, please don't raise your hands, not that I think anybody would, but did you ever feel like a nobody? In certain situations, or a good section of life where you felt like you were a nobody, you weren't of any influence, maybe of no particular value that you could estimate, probably little to no prospects as far as your future is concerned. And what's interesting about this particular text is the not slight hope it gives, but the confidence it gives if ever we're going to be a part of a group that the world categorizes as being nobodies or less than influential, powerless, or whatever, how the world would estimate us. This is the group we want to be a part of because this is God's choice group to use. And that's not my opinion. That's not some gracious thing we say to make people that are truly nobodies feel better about themselves, though they are still nobodies. God clearly uses this type of person, these type of people, for his glory. Because even then we get surprised. You ever been in a situation where you look back and you think, boy, I'm surprised anything good has come out of me, or something smart that was said, or something that was actually helpful to somebody else and they were grateful. And it's easy to look back and think, how did that happen? Hopefully, we don't lose that sense of inadequacy. I don't mean this crippling, low self-image that's often brought up in society, but this inadequate sense of ourselves to some degree is extremely healthy before God. Again, not if it's crippling us, because that's a demonstration of our own pride. But where we think, I know what I ought to do, and I'm going to be obedient. I don't know why God would use me, because I'm clearly not qualified. My confidence level is not where it ought to be. That's okay. That's okay. I was talking with one of my kids this past week or so, and just made the comment that I still get nervous before I speak. And they seemed a little surprised, but I still do. I get nervous before I speak because I honestly still don't feel adequate. I don't feel qualified. I'm nervous that I won't get it right, or I'll say something wrong, or I'll make it about me, or I'll waste your time. That's also on the list. I don't want to waste people's time. I want this to be truly beneficial as God would define it, not necessarily as popular opinion would define it. So that's why, for me in particular, I love speaking about this particular section in chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians, and if I could get away with it, I would probably try to preach it or teach it once a year, if anything for my own sake. So I'm not saying this just as some interesting side note to add some flavor to the text. To me, it is a profound truth that this is actually, regardless of what all the successful, and I put that in quotes, all the successful aspects of Christianity that are out there would think so little of us, this is what God actually does focus on. Because I think we also know, sadly, even in our churches, there are people that are more than willing to come alongside and help us feel inadequate in a wrong sense. And they'll come up with sometimes some of the most ungracious, unkind approaches because they think our motives or whatever are something else, rather than just trying to rightfully exhort or encourage one another in the things of God and His Word, which is what we all ought to do. But it's, again, not going to be popular. I think Tim got a good taste of that Monday night down at the rescue mission. He was telling me apparently he had a very less than enthusiastic crowd and had quite a little uproar, I suppose we could say, with some of the folks there, even to the point where they took one of the lowest possible blows they could and criticized his glasses. Something about his glasses, so that struck me funny that
They said they were fat.
fat glasses, it's okay. That was just, they tried to think of the meanest thing they could say, and that's where they landed. So it's easy to take things like that personally and think, well, people don't like me, and I already feel inadequate, I already have a low image of my true self. And again, a good deal of that is healthy before God because it keeps us dependent. It keeps us dependent. I mean, as a pastor and someone who gets up and preaches, one of the things that I'm always most afraid of is that when I get up and speak, it won't come across right, it won't be right, it won't be correctly passionate. I might mistake or stumble over something else and become a distraction to what needs to be out there. And I understand the grace of God overrules so much of that, but there's always this sense that, well, yeah, it's so far things have been all right, and I sense that God is still working in a particular way, but how do I know what's going to happen this time? So things like that, I don't think necessarily fight against faith as long as they keep directing us to our awareness of our dependence upon God. So dealing with the whole concept of wisdom, again, we'll start at verse 18. For the word of the cross, this is 1 Corinthians 1, for the word of the cross is to those who are perishing foolishness, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Again, all as God had planned, for it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. So where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Now, hopefully, that is clearly a rhetorical question for us, because we look on that and say, well, clearly we know the answer. And the answer is yes, he has made foolish the wisdom of this age. He certainly has. And if we're struggling with that right now with things that are going on, I think we have a really big problem. If anything, it's getting a lot easier to start to see, yeah, I see this, just from the way society, especially would consider itself to be the most enlightened part of society, thinking. So, verse 21, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was then well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. What an interesting statement there in that verse, just laying it out. God in his wisdom made it so people in their own wisdom would never come to know him. He chose the foolishness of the message preached to finally result in saving those. And the ultimate result of that would be belief. Not great miracle powers, not social status rising, not great intellect and all the best answers in the world. No. What's the ultimate result that's the most profound identifier of those who've been saved? They believe. They believe. They trust. That's it. That's why the world mocks it. So, verse 22, now Paul goes into two major categories of people. For indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom. Both have their own take on things, and worldly wisdom would say, well, you should appeal to both. So if the Jews want a sign, give them a sign. I mean, that's what it's going to take to win them. And if Greeks want wisdom, give them wisdom. Doesn't God have all the ultimate wisdom? And the answer is yes. The problem is the wisdom of God is foolishness to man. It's ridiculous to man. God's the one who actually has true wisdom, regardless of how mankind elevates or ranks their own wisdom. But, verse 23, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews, a stumbling block, and to Gentiles, foolishness. We dealt with that last week. This is going to be their summation of it, so we're not going to win them with popularity and natural instincts with the pure gospel. And the pseudo-church has caught on to this, I believe, and now has come up with a gospel that these kinds of people will believe. It does have a worldly wisdom about it that's been added to make it something they can accept. Or it does have signs that meet their demands added to it so that it can be sold, as it were, to them. So verse 24, but to those, and this is where we're at tonight, there's a distinction now. There's two groups of humanity. Most of us are in the Gentile part, the Greeks, the others the Jews. And then there's one third category. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks. So either way, it doesn't matter if they're Jew or Greek, if they're the called, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. It's not a stumbling block. It's not foolishness. It's the power of God. This is something that impresses us to the point where we would not be ashamed or embarrassed or cringe back at the mocking of the world, realizing the best wisdom of the world doesn't even begin to compete with God. So why would we be taken aback and embarrassed by the world? The point there in verse 25, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. And I've mentioned if we could conceive of the concept of foolishness with God or weakness with God, it would be stronger than men. But there is another take on this as well, and that would be mankind thinks the wisdom of God is foolish. So in his foolishness, from their estimate, it is far better than their greatest of wisdom. And the same thing where God is truly strong, mankind will naturally think he is weak, but in that weakness, he is stronger than the strongest of mankind. So now, let's apply it. You think this is far-fetched? You think this is just kind of an encouraging thing to losers in society to make them feel better? What does Paul say? Now, think, before we delve into this, think how unflattering this is. He's about to talk to a group that seems to be struggling a bit with this whole popularity thing and the wisdom of man and being enamored with society. And he's now, the next phrase, consider your calling, brethren. Let's look amongst you. What generally categorizes, as far as statistics are concerned, the highest groupings of people in our midst? For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. Wait a minute, you took three prominent categorizations of society, and you're saying in our group, statistically, not many of us fit any of those things. So we're in the other group. And the answer, of course, is yes, but that's the group statistically, in faith, we're fine with being a part of. What does it say? Instead, verse 27, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world. The world thinks they're foolish. The foolish things of the world, to what purpose? To shame the wise. That's why. They think they're so smart, they look on this and think, you are so foolish, so moronic, so stupid. And then God uses them to confound the wise, to shame the wise. God does it, not us coming up and thinking, well, we've got to be as smart as mankind so we get as many smarts about us as we can like them, and then we try to equal them on their playing field. God, no, you stay as low as possible. There's no need to do this. But if you do that, they're going to think you're foolish. This is, again, why I'm a little nervous where some of the apologetics is going. I appreciate some of the foundational things and other materials that come out of their ministries, but it's almost as though we've got to equal them where they would demand to be equaled. In our intellect, in our power, in our influence. No, actually, in faith, because it's what characterizes those who are saved, we believe. In that believing, in that faith, we trust God that in our weakness as far as the world's concerned, in our stupidity as far as the world's concerned, in our lack of any kind of ranking in the world as far as the world's concerned, that's who God is going to use. And isn't that, if we could kind of generally summarize our lives, and if we could pick something about our lives that we could at the end of our lives say, this was true. This was true. Would we not really want to be able to say, I was used of God? I don't want people to just assume that, and at my funeral everyone says he was used of God, but that I actually was used of God. I think a lot of us know that a lot of people get really nice things said about them at their funerals, But when it comes to standing before God, there might have been wood, hay, and stubble, as we'll get to in 1 Corinthians 3. Not really profoundly used of God, because they were clamoring to get out of the weak status, the uninfluential status, the moronic status as far as the world is concerned, and meet the world in those areas. Now, God can use some of these people, but that's not typically those he chooses. So why is it typical for Christians and ministries and churches trying to choose those people that we want to be the ones that represent the church? There is a side of us, I have to say this with caution, but there is a side of us that wants to look foolish to the world because of Christ, that wants to be unimportant to the world, to this age, because of Christ, that wants to be weak to the world, and in the world's estimate, because of Christ. That's undeniable. It should be undeniable for us to reach that conclusion. So he did this, for instance, he's chosen the weak things of the world, the shame, those which are strong, verse 28, and the base things, the lowest things of the world, and the despised, God has chosen. The things that are not, one of my all-time favorite phrases, even in the Greek, the nobodies, or we could plainly translate that, the zeros. The zeros. The big zeros, if you want to add any emphasis to zero. The things which are not, why? That he might nullify the things that are. What's the reason? That no man should boast before God. That is a fundamental purpose that God has revealed in why he chooses, why he does what he does, so that none of us, no man, can boast before God. So then we have to stop and think, well, I don't know if I would call myself boastful, but I think there's a few things I could probably brag on and boast about. Well, maybe in comparison to each other, and that's not wise, as we'll see another time. Those who compare themselves among themselves are not wise. But if we compare ourselves to God, his infinite knowledge, holiness, righteousness, any of those things, yeah, we don't compare. Wouldn't begin to compare before God. So in the notes, we had ended toward the top of page 10. They'd just begun point 3 with the question, so why not make the message more acceptable to these groups? Why not appeal to them? We had dealt with point A, there will be issues and topics that we will strive to word and phrase to make them more understandable to various groups throughout our lives, but as far as God's Word is concerned, we must start with the premise that that's God's Word, God's wisdom is already as it should be, even if, and dare I say, especially if people normally, naturally reject it and respond badly to it. Boy, does that contradict most of our Christian philosophy these days. Well, you'd better change that. Because look at the reaction you're getting. I mean, couldn't we have gone to Tim Monday night and said, Tim, why did you read those texts? You didn't have to read those texts. You could have read other texts. Why did you read those texts? I know they're associated with the gospel and they're part of getting the bad news out of the way, but look at the people you offended. Now they'll never hear the gospel, as we say in our self-confidence and our read on the success of something. When in reality, we go to a text like this and we realize, that's actually the standard. Now again, I always feel like I have to put this disclaimer on it. I don't need to be offensive in myself, in my personality, in my presentation. I don't need to be arrogant and condescending as in and of myself. That's why at a place like the Mission, I try to keep myself at the same level. I am in need of the mercy and grace of God. These verses describe me. I am totally dependent in the saving of my soul upon the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then try to make it clear, so are we all. So point B, that's where we're at now. The key to this verse, though, this verse 24, is found in the very first, or in the first phrase, but to those who are the called. This now distinguishes us from any grouping of humanity. And that's interesting that it's that grouping because it directs attention. You're part of the called? Yes, I'm a part of the called. Who called you? And that's exactly, I think, the point. When we stop and we think, so someone else other than just who you are identifies you. You're not identified as Jew. You're not identified as Greek. How do you identify yourself again? I have been called. And that's what identifies us, not our natural state, not our condition in life, not anything about my stature or anything else. It is the calling of God that makes the difference. And that has not changed. So for us to set our goals, to try to elevate ourselves or get some kind of distinguished notice by meeting some of the standards of the world is not a noble goal. It's like we're fighting to get out of this category that God typically uses. So the key in this verse is the phrase there, but to those who are the called. We are apt, as the Corinthians were, to look on things from our earthly perspective, as in asking, why didn't God work this way? Why didn't he do it this other way? Why did he do it the way he did it? Or why isn't he doing it? We could ask all these questions as though somehow we have a good enough perspective with our few years of wisdom gaining to start to now critique in a kind of, as humble as we possibly think ourselves to be, God's outworking of his plan. Why did God do it that way? How many times have we heard other people seemingly well-meaning or a thought has crossed our mind, I don't know why God did it that way, and we're asking the question in somewhat of a critical way. Because our tone sometimes can say, I don't know. I don't know why God did it that way. I wouldn't have. Now, I certainly have said before, I don't know why God is doing this, but we know God is right. He is perfect. He is all wisdom. And a lot of think, well, that's not something necessarily you're going to say to comfort someone. Well, maybe the number one objective isn't primarily comfort first. Because sometimes people want comfort on their own terms, not realizing if I comfort them on their own terms, it will not provide actual comfort. Typically, we have to have our attention redirected back to the truth. And that's, of course, what we're learning here. So we oftentimes ask, why didn't God do such and such a certain way, a way that fits our own perspective, when we should, and this is a fair statement, we should reasonably expect that he works from and by his limitless perspective. He works from and by his limitless perspective. So who am I in light of just that one truth? Who am I to look on anything God does, or if you want to say allows, and say, I don't approve. I don't like it. We're probably stating a truth that I don't like it. But we dare not say it in such a way as though it should carry some weight, especially if we start saying these things out loud with others around, where we allow ourselves to criticize God in the earshot of others and feel okay because, most people would question this. Most people would say, I don't get it. I've gone to some of the best ministers and some of the best counselors out there, and they shake their head too and say, I don't know. I don't know how to respond. And so somehow that carries any weight at all in even the initial consideration of genuinely questioning God and his limitless perspective. You see, we can't even begin to consider questioning God because his understanding is infinite. So how dare we question God? And yet we feel at liberty to, I'm hurt, I don't understand, and others don't understand. And if I just say, well, God knows what he's doing. You know how many people that makes angry? I don't doubt it makes people angry. but it's the truth, and they're reacting to the truth, hopefully not ungraciously given. And so we're going to come up and say, well, clearly you're lacking in faith here. God's understanding is infinite, and how dare you even be sad? No, there's all kinds of sadness and grief and struggling in our belief before God, but never to the point where we give any legitimacy and even the least critical thought against God in any way, ever. That's all encompassing. Because give me another way around that, where it's kind of okay to do it. And let's not point to the Psalms. Let's be very careful about the misuse of the Psalms. Most of the time, the Psalms end as they ought. And what's so wonderful about so many of the Psalms is you see the struggle to trust and submit before God. And so you see partway through this struggle, like Jeremiah in Lamentations 3, one of my personal favorites, as he struggles with this. So I like to point out how many people would be comforted in the worst of turmoils, a most difficult time of life. And you read the first part of Lamentations 3, where God just seems to be so cruel. He's used even Jeremiah as a target. And these pains of these events are all entering inside of him, and they're the worst possible pains. And he was deeply, deeply grieved. And then you get to the transition, at least the first transition in Lamentations 3. There's a few back and forths there. But then this thought came, it is of the Lord's mercies that we're not consumed. Who's going to get comfort from that? And yet there it is. Do you realize, before you allow the pity party to get too out of hand here, it's of God's mercies that we're not just utterly consumed. But why not? Because his compassions, they fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. That's a fabulous text. I love the depths of despair pictured there in Lamentations 3. And then what changes it? Circumstances didn't change. Feeling some comfort in criticizing God didn't change. It was understanding, oh no, God has been more than gracious. And he is the epitome and definition of faithfulness. I dare not begin to question it. That's more than a slippery slope. That's off the side of a cliff into an endless chasm, if we want to picture, if we start to flirt with those ideas. Point C, but to the same groups just mentioned, this message, instead, Christ crucified, is power, the ultimate of signs. Power, the ultimate of signs, is strength and the wisdom of God, which mankind can't even begin to truly try to challenge or grapple with. Colossians, one of my, again, personal favorites with the wisdom of man, versus that of God put in the form of a warning here. Verse 1, let's read the first 4 verses of Colossians chapter 2. Colossians 2, verse 1, for I want you to know, Paul tells the church at Colossae, how great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are at Laodicea, and for all those who have not personally seen my face. I do have a grief for you, and I know I'm just saying this, but you haven't even seen me, but I still have a heart for you. And what is his grief? What is his concern? Verse 2, that their hearts may be encouraged. Well, that's a very noble thing. That's good. Having been knit together in love, and attaining to all the wealth that comes from what? The full assurance of understanding. That's an interesting thing that we would think someone's going to come to a point of encouragement from that perspective there, full assurance of understanding. And I would sum it up by saying knowing the truth, knowing what's what, knowing why things are happening, resulting in what? A true knowledge of God's mystery. And what is that true knowledge of God's mystery? That is Christ, and it's Christ himself. That's the point of comparison to everything else. Well, why Christ himself? In whom, verse 3, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Now, fair question, I think, to ask in our churches these days, is that true? Do we believe it? What did we just say? In whom, this is speaking of Christ, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And I kind of wonder how many people would say, well, I don't think so. I mean, did Jesus do complex math? Did Jesus delve into complex science? Now, I know we could fire back quickly and say he created everything, so absolutely. But no, in practical outworking of his life, did he do that? Did we see demonstrations of Jesus working through algebraic or calculus or some type of complex math or something like that, or biochemistry and working through to the molecular level of these things? Do we see any example of that? Clearly, his miracles demonstrated power over these things, but still, just getting past it, I'm headed somewhere with this. And that is, no, I can yield the point. No, we don't. So you're saying in him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and already we've listed a couple disciplines of learning, and you're saying he didn't demonstrate or explain any of that. No. So we've got at least two decisions, or one of two decisions. One is that that's just not true. But we can't reach that conclusion. The other, which probably won't impress many people either, but the other answer to that is maybe we're the ones that have the wrong definition of wisdom and knowledge. Huh. You ever thought about that? Just as a for instance, and I know this is anecdotal, but as a for instance, have you ever met someone that you know, generally speaking, as far as life is concerned, they are a very intelligent, smart, and wise person, but they can't do most algebraic equations? But you don't hold that against them because they're a very smart person. Yeah, so obviously it's a little bit more broad than we might think, and when it comes to God and his wisdom, he actually is, in Christ then, the core idea of knowledge and wisdom. So if I want to truly have genuine knowledge, and I truly want to be a wise person, I cannot go wrong if my focus is on that which is found in Jesus Christ himself. I cannot go wrong, even though I might not be the best in all these other earthly priorities. See how we don't think in faith sometimes? Because some people would say in him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and I have trouble saying that to people because they'll shake their head and say, well, I can think of some other academic disciplines out there that I just don't think Jesus was an expert on. Well, maybe those academic disciplines aren't actually the ultimate definer of wisdom and knowledge. I would rather go that direction, though many of those in academia would probably frown on it, even in Christian circles, but I'd rather go there. And that our Bible schools and seminaries and things like that would keep this in mind, then we wouldn't be so quick to try to liberalize our theology or the gospel so that we seem more acceptable to the accrediting agencies. One more verse there. Verse 4 in Colossians 2. I say this. Here's the purpose statement. I say this in order that no one may delude you with persuasive argument. That no one tricks you, beguiles you. I think that's how the Old English has it. No one tricks you with a persuasive argument. And yet, I think those people that come with their persuasive arguments, if you say, well, listen, I've got the perfect answer back at you, and they say, what is it? Jesus Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Do we think they're going to stop and say, you got me there? No, they're going to laugh. They think it's a ridiculous answer. And so, many of our best apologists would probably say, well, it's probably not the best answer. Actually, it is the best answer. It's not the most acceptable answer. But it is, without doubt, the best answer. And I wish we'd go back to that, rather than thinking, well, I can't say that because they're going to immediately have a response back at that, and then we're going to look foolish, which they're going to think we're foolish anyway if we preach Christ crucified. That's never going to be acceptable in the wisdom of the world. unless it's watered down or misdirected somehow. So that was that text in Colossians. But this is only seen by the called. They're the only ones that are going to be able to spot it. So the bulleted point under C there, this is a definite or a unique group, no matter how you look on it. Even if those who cringe at the usage of the possible usage of the phrase the called here, even if one takes the phrase the call, or the called, as only an invite, this is distinguished, no matter what, from those mentioned in verse 23. So even if you say, well, I don't think it's, what you guys call the effectual call or whatever, I think it's a general call, they're still distinguished from those in verse 23. So no matter how you look on it, they're still a unique group. And I think you have to have them as the called, and it's the effectual call, because they're the ones that then know this, and they're only going to know that because of the grace of God at work on them and the Holy Spirit. Off to the left of that, this is the difference between the two. This is the difference between the two groupings of people. The difference between them is not the ethnicity or the culture. The difference that distinguishes us from the rest of humanity has nothing to do with my genetics, my genetic background, my ethnicity, my culture, my education. Any of those things aren't what distinguish any of us from the rest of humanity. What distinguishes us truly from the rest of humanity is simply the call. And that's from God. That's from God. That's what makes us different. So we'd better be very careful what and how we want to identify ourselves with. Point D, the power and wisdom of God are seen in His working. And this is such a huge point. I should have bolded it. The power and wisdom of God are seen in His working and not mankind's response to it. This is the problem we have. Well, what did you just do? Well, we had two people speak. One person spoke, and they had thousands of people, thousands of responses. We had another person speak, hardly anybody responded at all. As a matter of fact, most of the people rejected it. Now, which one was used of God? Which one had the power of God at work? You see the danger in that general illustration there? Well, I would imagine the one where there were thousands of people responding. Not necessarily. The only way we're going to know which one was truly God at work was when we finally know the content of what was actually said and what the source was. Then we'll know, okay, if it was truly Christ and Christ crucified, in Him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, and the people rejected it, that was still God at work. And if it was the other way, where thousands of people accepted it, and we know the content, that was God at work, it was not determined by the response of people. That's not what defines truth. That's not what defines God at work, the response of people. But we think it is, and there's the problem. That's why that's such a key point in light of this truth here. The power and wisdom of God are seen in His working, not mankind's response to it. Because we are apt to measure so-called success by popular response. And that's not healthy based on what we've just read. So, it is more powerful in that it accomplished more than all of man's power combined could ever do, and it is smarter in that it was done as no person could have ever figured. Because all of mankind, with all of our power and strength, cannot conquer death. Because mankind and all of our strength, all of our ingenuity, cannot conquer sin. We cannot conquer any of these things. And with all the great wisdom of the ages at our disposal and easily accessible on the internet now, we still can't solve some of the most fundamental, basic issues of life, like our own feelings, our own perspectives on life. We can't conquer that. We just don't stand a chance. So much so that I think most of our society is back to one of its pendulum swings, where we're dealing with the feelings of others by masking them somehow, not actually dealing with them. And that's a problem. I think it's just a point off the left there, and in this verse, Christ is again referenced. though this time he doesn't use the term crucified. In this verse, Christ is again referenced, though without the word crucified, since the crucifixion is now seen as an ultimate emblem of power and wisdom. It's associated with Christ. We think of Christ, we think of the crucifixion. And we think of the crucifixion because we see it as one of the ultimate displays of power, and the proof of that display of power is seen theologically in the conquering of sin, and is seen practically in his resurrection from the dead, which not one human being can do. So the best of the best of the best that we've ever come up with and ever could come up with cannot do that one thing that everybody is subject to. That alone should at least stand out, that the wisdom of God is so much superior to ours. So point number 4, so we can conclude God having outdone mankind in all aspects. That's a safe conclusion. He's outdone them all. I don't even need to hear all the arguments of mankind trying to compete with God. It just gets dull after a while. It's almost embarrassing. Actually, it should be embarrassing. Point A, in the final assessment, this will be further proven, the, quote, foolishness, or the foolish thing of God, if you want to translate it that way, the foolish thing of God is more wise than the wisdom of man, and the weak thing of God is stronger than the power of man. That's a fundamentally true across-the-board statement. Off to the left, we can start to see that what we see as our own weaknesses and our own ignorances, where we just don't know something, are not necessarily unmovable obstacles in being used of God. It's so easy to, and I don't think we understand the motive we have for this. You ever gotten to a point where you just said, well, I'm just stupid? You ever used that one before? I certainly have. I'm just stupid. Clearly. And I think there's a whole bunch of motives in there, and we don't take the time to think about it. I think one of the motives is I want an excuse card to play. Well, I shouldn't have to face this responsibility. I shouldn't have to face this situation. I'm like, why not? Because I'm just stupid. I'm ignorant. You know, the real problem with that isn't how we're putting ourselves down or even trying to excuse ourselves from responsibility. You know, the biggest problem with that type of thinking is it dismisses the grace and power of God in it. So you don't know something. So you're not the smartest in a particular area. You're not the strongest, the most successful in something. That's not an excuse to give up on life. If anything, in light of this text, we think, boy, you know, if I can get my thinking wrapped around the correct thing, I actually now look on my life as I am profoundly credentialed to be used of God. And people say, well, how can you say that? Sounds arrogant. How are you profoundly credentialed to be used of God? You're a nobody. Thank you. We might respond. Good response. Well, you have no natural talents or skills or a personality that people like. That's right. I don't. Now, might that improve? It might. But we're not banking on it as though that's what's required to be used of God. So we kind of have a different thought of life. You know, people really don't think anything of me. Yes. Have you ever thought of that as an internal response? Probably not. We think, well, that's just ridiculous thinking. But not in light of this text. Because what do we most of the time do? Nobody thinks of me. Nobody thinks I'm important. Oh, sad, sad me. Nothing's ever going to happen in my life, and I'll never amount to anything because people don't like me. People don't think highly of me. And yet if we go back to a text like this, in faith, which is exactly where we're supposed to be, we will have that, yes, all right, things are looking good. The world and its assessments of me are very, very low. Who thinks that way? I don't even think we have that in Christian psychology anymore. But that's exactly how we ought to think. Not because it's just some clever thought, but because it says it. It says it right here. And Jesus Christ, of course, was meek and lowly, he's described as. Made himself of no reputation. He was a supreme example of this. And could lose a crowd faster than probably most anybody could in history. Because popularity was never on the agenda. So, hard to argue with the Word of God, at least it should be. Off to the left, we can start to see what we say as our own weaknesses and ignorance are not necessarily immovable obstacles in being used of God. Another interesting point Mr. Linsky pointed out in verse 25 here, by using these two neuters there in verse 25, because the foolishness of God is wiser than man and the weakness of God is stronger than man. They're categories, they're not people. So by using these two neuters, Paul avoids ascribing the abstract qualities of foolishness and weakness to God. It's just an interesting usage and carefulness in the language. Paul avoids ascribing the abstract qualities of foolishness and weakness to God as though they were two of his actual attributes, for as attributes both of them are contradictory to God's very being. I just thought that was insightful, because someone might consider there's a foolishness with God or a weakness with God, but as Mr. Linsky says, yeah, but typically if you're going to have a word that's going to modify or describe another, it's going to match its usage in grammar, and here it doesn't. It's though Paul was being extra careful to say he's not actually weak, he's not actually foolish, but God usurps any of it anyway. So then point C, this verse and the ones to follow demonstrate, at least it should, they demonstrate the futility of the fear of man. It should demonstrate the futility of the fear of man. Another favorite text is Romans chapter 11. It's hard to read this casually. It ought to be. Romans 11, 33 through 36. Again, I can't help but read verse 32 because it doesn't seem to fit, not with the wisdom of man. For God, verse 32 of Romans 11, for God has shut up all in disobedience that he might show mercy to all. We dealt with that some years ago. That's a verse that would make a lot of people think, that doesn't seem right. That's not the way I would do it. I don't think most people would ever do it that way. Shut them all up in disobedience and trap them in their own thing so that he could show mercy? And look at the reaction to that. Verse 33, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who became his counselor? Or who has first given to him that it might be paid back to him again? For from him and through him and to him are all things. So absolutely, then to him be the glory forever. True, let it be so. Amen. That's one of those, again, seemingly doxological, enthusiastic responses that sometimes we like to say in some glorious presentation of something without considering what's actually being stated there. So we'll begin point 5 on that note as an introduction to next week, but consider how God has worked in and around you. Consider your calling, brethren. Look around you. Can we say that here? All right. Let's look around. Number one, we're a much smaller group tonight. I understand there's sickness going on, but we're looking around and we're thinking, who here is really somebody and why? Who here do we look in our midst and say, probably most people think you're a pretty impressive person? Do you mind if I stop and I assume that generally speaking, all of us here, people really don't think that about us? Individually? Certainly not as a group, but individually, they don't. I've certainly had my share of people laughing at me and thinking I'm just the perfect picture of what stupid looks like. And in many cases, even in practical things in life, I stumble through things. I don't know the answer to it. There's some things I'm perplexed by. I can't get around. I'm not the most brilliant guy in some of these things. Plenty of things. Just try to help me fix your car. And you'll quickly realize, okay, he's clearly limited in some of these areas. It's embarrassing to see him try, especially when I'm trying to take off a brake caliper and I'm haven't done the physics of picturing which way is lefty-loosey, and I'm actually tightening it with all my might. In perplexed way, I can't get the bolt off. Yes, I demonstrated my great wisdom of that before, sadly, more than once. So yeah, there's plenty of things. Well, should I be devastated by that? You know how many people would hear that and think, wow, that guy doesn't have basic sense. I'm sure all of us would fall into that category in many categories. Well, we're just not the smartest people the world's ever seen, and we're certainly not the most successful, we're not the most likable. We weren't voted, anyone in here voted most likely to succeed in your class? Do they even do that anymore? Probably not, because it makes people feel bad. Yeah, I wasn't either. I don't remember anybody come up and saying, wow, if anyone's headed for success, you are. It was almost as though you always had these people come alongside and say, you're kind of odd. You're kind of strange, and we're a little concerned for you. And they might use general terms, at least when I was younger, you got to get with a program. Yeah, but whose program are we talking about here? And what is this program? And even if we're talking about the world's program, I'm a little confused. I may not be the brightest guy, clearly I'm not, but the world's program seems to constantly be in flux. So I wouldn't even know how to get with the program if it was out there, other than just comply and agree and don't rock the boat, to use another great wise statement. So how do I begin there in verse 26? Consider your calling. So dealing with the called, just look around to see how God typically works. In using this term calling, Paul is keeping the focus on what God is doing, not look around you and see people who work themselves into their positions by their natural talent. They just work themselves there. If you think about some things, you think, well, no, someone's got some natural talent there. But I kind of wonder if maybe God hasn't really profoundly demonstrated his grace in somebody. I don't know a lot of things I would feel comfortable sharing about myself, but one of the fears I have struggled with the bulk of my life is speaking in front of people. I'm extremely intimidated. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to be made fun of. I don't want to trip over things. I don't like to hear myself speak and be the one who has the position put on me to do that. I've been terrified of being in front of people since I was a little boy. Scared of this. So the only thing I personally can chalk it up to is God has just been gracious. And I still struggle with that fear. What if he's not gracious the next time? What if he's not? If he doesn't particularly make something seemingly impressive to any group of people or useful in anybody's estimation, so be it. He knows what he's doing. So I'd imagine if any of us are struggling with anything, well, I wouldn't be good at that, or I don't think I could really serve God in some capacity. We've got to be careful about choosing what we might consider the most in front of people or glamorous positions. My guess is that those that God truly is using in what we might consider in front of people type things, he has chosen the ones who are truly the least qualified for it, naturally speaking. Truly the least qualified. I remember, I'm going to have to end with this, and I wish this young man would have stayed with it, but I remember when my dad started his FPOA class, Future Preachers of America, and there were different teenagers wanting to kind of join into this. It was kind of fun that Dad would give us a once a month time to preach in front of the congregation, usually a couple of us, because we couldn't fill a half hour, let alone 45 minutes. And I remember one fellow wanted to join. His name was Ken. And I can even remember as a teenager thinking, I don't think so. This guy's about as shy as you can be. He's very shy. He's very quiet, very intimidated by other people, and he wasn't certainly a big guy with big stature or anything, and clearly struggled with his, at least looked to me, he struggled with self-image. But he joined the class anyway, and my dad let him in, and we're curious to see how he would do. And he worked really, really, really hard. And I still remember the first time he spoke in front of the church, and it was like this nervousness for him. And he got up and he opened his text and he read it, and suddenly there was a different guy. There was a different guy speaking from the pulpit, and you're thinking, where did that come from? And I remember my dad using a term, and in retrospect now, I think it's an unfortunate term, but he kept saying, he's got a natural talent. Actually, my take on it now in retrospect, hate to disagree with my dad, especially now since he's in glory, but to think that, no, I think he was a great demonstration of the grace of God applied on one of the least likely people ever. And Ken was even his public speaking skills seemed like from the start were really good. He just had a knack, and he could speak, and he had the inflection and the enthusiasm, and then, of course, dealing with the text. And he seemed genuinely interested about it. And I don't know, that's one of the ones that's stuck in my head as, I don't think we can truly estimate what God might do, especially when we start thinking of ourselves and thinking, well, I don't think I could ever really talk to someone about the gospel or approach them about something, or what, I'll stumble over it or ever speak in front of a group of people or even a small group. We don't know what God will do. Even if we get up in front of a group and we stumble our way through it, who knows what God might do in that presentation. So, I wanted to get to at least point A underneath that. Look at your own ranks, as it were, when you were called or chosen of God, and the first one up, not many wise. As far as the realm of the flesh would say, someone is wise. Those naturally scholarly people, not many. It doesn't mean that there aren't some truly intelligent, smart people as far as the world is concerned, that not any of them can come to Christ. No, they can, but not many. And again, this is one of the problems I see in taking people like that have a natural intellect and scholarship, and we put them up as though now everyone has to be like this if you're ever going to be a teacher. If you're ever going to speak at a conference, you're ever going to write a book, you've got to be here like this person. And look at the big words they use. No, let's be very careful how we limit the working of God in this area. Now, by the way, just because someone gets up in front of a group or tries to work with other people and they're about as unskilled as they can be and they're just messing everything up, doesn't mean they're truly called of God for this. The key is God will give them. That's why when we get to 1 Corinthians 12, we're going to hopefully by then have a solid understanding then of the use of the gifts of the Spirit and why they're needed. They're not points of pride. We desperately need them. We couldn't get anything done of value if it weren't for the gifting of the Holy Spirit of God. So when we hit 1 Corinthians 12, we'll be ready for that because of texts like this. So this idea of called not only includes how they would be used, but called to what? By the calling of faith. So we'll pick up with that next week because that's actually a significant point here, but it's not just some general category we give, because if someone says, you're what? I'm the called. First question would typically be, who called you? And then another question almost as equally, if not before that, people would say, called to what? Oh, it's just the genius of God on display in texts like this, because of where it directs our attention. It's not at us. Someone else is doing the calling to something, for something, and he's the one then that's going to be the one we look to, and we're not intimidated then by the world. Well, let's end this time in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed to fellowship a little bit here in our lack of being popular, and then go face the world in the coming of autumn. If you've seen the weather, the coming of autumn tonight into tomorrow, so be it. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for you revealing that your wisdom is there, and then helping us also realize that our natural wisdom will not naturally look on it as wise, but in faith we will trust you. Your wisdom will be at work, and we will come to know and grow in your true wisdom. Let this be our goal and our objective in life, so that we would be those who strive to end our life, whenever it is, when we face its end, that we will be able to count on that we were used of you, and that is our main objective through these years on this earth, being used of you. This we ask for and thank you for in Jesus' name. Amen.
Discovered I have to make I make a lot of Word docs to jot down thoughts that are connected to something I'm working on, but I've had to create a random thoughts one. But so I was thinking about that phrase. I used it when you were looking at the desktops. Your computer's only as fast as your slowest part, because you'll have what's they call a bottleneck. So no matter how fast everything else is, if it all has to go through a component that's really slow, it's just going to bog it down. Same thing with maturity. So you can have as much knowledge and experience, you have all the right answers in advance, but then something happens at a moment you weren't prepared for, there's your bottleneck. Your knee-jerk reaction becomes your bottleneck. It's you at your most actively mature. Because it's when the rubber meets the road and all of a sudden you find out how badly you fall apart. Like public speaking, right? You sit back and listen to someone do something like, oh, I'd do this and I'd say this, and you get up there, you find out how much you don't have in the background. So we're about as mature as our least mature moment, in a way. Obviously, there's flaws with that, but it stands true. So when Paul goes and he says, there's not many among you wise, right? You're not a bunch of smart people that got picked out here. Right? It's because even if you take, like that phrase, we have the internet. I think it's hilarious because hypothetically, if you had gone before the age of the internet, people would have thought that if you had the world's collective wisdom, past and present, all put there, everyone would come to a consensus and now everyone would know the right answer. Well, that's not what happened. Everyone thought they had the right answer and they all fought each other. That's what happened. So even when you pick all of the wisest of the world, they still fight each other because none of them agree. Right. So this is what the Areopagus was, right? They would all go and they would duke it out.
And then they stowed their safety net with the unknown God.
Because people think, well, I have the choice between the wisdom of the world or the foolishness of God. And well, the wisdom of the world, we seem to almost think is concise and agreed on. But even they don't. They don't have it. Not by any stretch of the imagination do they agree. And then their mottos then become strength through diversity, right? We have strength in how much we disagree.
Well, and then my theory is, too, that for whatever it's worth, that once we get too smart or too confusing, agnosticism becomes the ultimate.
Well, yeah, because if nobody's right, then you
okay.
can't tell me I'm wrong. Right. So that guy, so you said, why'd you have to pick that text? Right. That's what the one guy said. And he came up, and you could have preached on any other text. And then he goes and he tries to discount, because I keep saying, okay, but you still have to explain what Romans 1 means to me, right? And he goes and pulls out one of the local ESVs and goes into Jeremiah. All their words were stupid and foolish. I think I told you this, but it's like, so, but you do realize you're discounting yourself. If you argue for your own ignorance and you win, then you can't talk. But this is what people do. They attempt to excuse by explaining how dumb everybody is.
Jeremiah making the point, the people's words were stupid, but not God.
Well, and
That's
people,
the point. That's why we go to the Bible.
People are like dogs in that they always tend to bark up the wrong tree, even when they're right. They always seem to pick the wrong path in the road to the solution. They always go the longest route. They take the wrong way. They go and they make complaints to the wrong people because we think passion is the way to get things done, and it's just fun. For example, I kept feeling like I had to sneeze, and it just kept going up to my right eye through the water. I was like, I can't sneeze.
Sneeze Dutch, man, what's up?
As long as you're with people.
Outside. It's really dark. I wouldn't go back in the cars because people will not see. Yeah.
Johnny did not ask.
Hey, Johnny,
Should not be outside.
you can't go outside, but not tonight, okay?
Don't you can stay around my Johnny's house.
I know, I just wanted to get that quick.
So, I didn't know Michael was back home yesterday.
Oh, great.
He made it back
I
yesterday.
didn't know that.
He's working with Christopher.
So did Christopher get that bid, do you know, or not?
I don't know, but he said he was working with him, or at least helping with him. And then he's apparently planning on coming with Rick.
Oh,
Right, that's right, Rick told me and I forgot about that.
So,
will he stay with you or stay in our house?
I don't know.
Well, he could stay at
He's
Tim's
in, I
house.
don't know, I got a guest room.
Well, we
And
have
then,
the comfy couches too. Very comfy.
and then Matthew says it sounds like more and more people are planning on coming up for Thanksgiving. So,
Rick seemed to think everybody was. The only one in doubt was Deborah and Matt.
so I know. So David and Paige are gonna stay with us. So on that note, if you find a queen bed somewhere, like a bed frame or something, because we want to put. So originally we were gonna put like a twin in the guest room, but then when I heard David and Paige were saying like, oh,
It's the mattress that's expensive.
yeah.
Well, but those
They don't
kind
need
in
a
the
mattress.
box.
That's true. Those are
Those box kind. Walmart has the best prices on those.
Soup powder.
That box kind that when you put it on the thing and
Yeah.
you slit it and let it.
The last time we've had air mattresses in there, they've always seemed to get
Right. And this won't get hold because it's a good mattress, and it has one down. A bunch of the kids have gotten the.
We've got two of them now. You can put them next to each other.
I told Matthew I'll just nail a
Tried
cot
that
in
one
the walls.
somewhere, remember? If that's the big.
Because I want to go in and like install a basic like Walmart ceiling fan like I do in my office, and then put some 32-inch TV or something. But just make something.
I've got a little TV in here if you want to take it.
Because I want to make it like a sort of mini hotel room, both for people staying in Thanksgiving, but also when Jillian gets to her due date, I want to have actually the real guest room and not just some.
Well, take
Yeah,
that,
dinky old
take
room.
that television, because we got that from the nursery some time ago and it's not being used and it wasn't needed. It works.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it just needs to be hotel quality as far as I'm
Right.
concerned. It's always garbage.
They can make a hotel room.
I think that's a 32 back there.
Will Evelyn be coming up?
What?
Evelyn?
I don't think.
Oh, because you said more and more people.
Well, I said more as in like summers.
Yeah.
Pretty sure, Dave and Catherine are coming in. The key would be to see if anyone could stay through Sunday, but that's like
Well,
Friday,
Matthew said
Saturday, and then Sunday.
Matthew said he'll be doing likely Wednesday to Wednesday. I don't know what David and Paige are.
Rick's coming Wednesday too.
Somebody wants those holy points.
Well, Matthew knows I'll have plenty of time off by that point.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, and it's a free stay. The hotel rooms would cost.
Yeah, is me
thank you.
you guys.
Yeah, Matthew, David, and Paige will be too, so that's why I want to get the guest room in better shape. Because she'll be fairly well along pregnancy-wise, so I want to make sure we don't have like a couch or something. Bed or something.
I would.
Just gonna drop it again, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. There was the
There you go.
Ah, you didn't see that one coming.
anyway.
Uno reverse.
There it goes. That's what happens.
Man, his face is moist. Goodness.
He's going down to his neck.
I told Jillian, I said, this kid's about to get really big once a newborn baby shows up.
Yeah, those look giant.
That immediate
Next
weight
to the-
gain. Now he's still a baby.
It is 75. How's it gonna
Yep.
drop?
So tonight it's going to go real slow.
Supposed to rain.
Oh, I know it's dark. If you want to take the car.
You get to look at the light.
Hey, not hit a deer.
He would hit a deer.
He would.
I mean, just as likely as I am to hit a deer. By the way,
No.
Yeah.
for
close to
That'll
30.
get you
for
faster.
the first month and stuff, I've already got covered on insurance. I do have the gap, so if it ends up getting hit, I still have all the money.
Oh, you got the gap insurance?
Nothing else. But I was like, well, I'm putting a decent amount of money into this. I can't really stand to lose a bunch right now. So I'll do that. I can cancel at any
I
point.
think with Anna's car, the insurance was very generous in their estimate.
I know, but I can't bank too much on it. So I'll go like a little bit.
pretty sure I know which one it is.
Right.
He like careens to the side, but then adjusts his head as it swings.
We'll do it now and we'll try it.
While you're thinking,
Yep.